Species. Unite.
So I think this whole idea of cumulative culture is a way to make humans exceptional. But it's clear to me that humans are exceptional, and seeing it through baboon glasses, I can understand in a different way why they're exceptional. Many of the things that we think are uniquely human are actually present in other animals.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Novogratz. This is Species Unite. This conversation is with Dr. Shirley Strum, the renowned anthropologist who has studied wild baboons for more than 50 years. Shirley has lived and worked among wild baboons in Kenya, documenting their social lives, their intelligence, their relationships, and their ability to adapt and survive in a world increasingly shaped by humans. And she has a new book out about what she has learned over more than half a century of living with baboons. It's called Echoes of Our Origins. In it, she challenges long-held assumptions and invites us to rethink evolution, the human-animal divide, and what it means to coexist in a world that we are rapidly reshaping. This conversation is about science, yes, but it's also about humility, hope, and the messy, beautiful complexity of life on Earth. Thank you very much, Dr. Strum, for being here.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
I read your book, Echoes of Our Origins, and I have to admit, I knew nothing about baboons at all before I read it. And I've seen baboons, and I've seen how people react to baboons, right? They have a bad reputation.
Yeah.
So you've
Very
been
bad.
doing this for 50 years, which is unbelievable. Can you just start with going way back and how all this started in the first place? Why baboons and how it unraveled?
Well, it was the late 60s, early 70s. I mean, we knew hardly anything about primates in the wild back then. And so there were these three studies on baboons, one in Nairobi National Park, one in Amboseli, and one in Southern Africa. And what amazed them was when they put their data together, it didn't seem to matter where the baboons were. They all converged on what the scientists thought was the baboon model. And then that got applied to all primates. Baboons were being used as the as a model for the earliest human beings. And so I went out to try and see whether this model was actually true. And I used some techniques that were very common for captive research, but not very common for research in the wild, which meant that I identified all the animals. I had a list of who to study and when to study them and I have to say this, I'm standing on their shoulders. They didn't identify any but the males. Yeah, you're laughing, I'm laughing. It's so obvious to us now, but it wasn't obvious back then. And that was a bias. The fact that they had this model, I wanted to know whether the model was real or whether the different people had their own biases that crept into the facts. And so it didn't take me very long to realize that no, it wasn't the way they discussed it. I got hooked by the baboons. And it took me a long time to figure out what was going on. And although I was a feminist at Berkeley and I was marching in the streets and I got tear gassed by the Oakland police and all of that. I didn't go out with a feminist agenda, but the fact was that I found out that females were the core of the group, that they had their own dominance hierarchy, that they were the ones who defended and protected their own families. And so that ended up being a big part of what was my early discoveries. But I also understood a little bit more about what was going on, social strategies of competition and defense, which no one had described before. Can I give you an example of
I would
each of them?
love some examples. Yes.
So something for competition is I would be with a male who I didn't think was even involved or paying attention to the sexual consort that was going on between an adult male and a female who was swollen and the followers. And he suddenly went in as soon as the followers started to increase the aggression, and they went off and fought. And as they were fighting, he walked away with the female and groomed her, copulated, and for baboons, possession is 9/10 of the law. Another social strategy had to do with, and here I can remember the very first time I saw this. It was a large subadult male, and he was losing an encounter with another male, and he left, and I was writing down, okay, he lost, and he went away, got a baby, and put the baby on his belly, and went back to where his protagonist was, and that was the end of that interaction. But I subsequently saw a male who tried to take a brown infant who he wasn't friends with, tried to take a black infant who he wasn't friends with, and eventually, anyway, got a black infant who was friends with. And the reason it works is because the troop does not defend males, but they do defend infants and females. And so we call this an agonistic buffer, and it's, common knowledge now, but he needed the cooperation of the infant, which meant he had to create a relationship before he could use the infant. And also, the infant had to trust him, because if the infant screamed at him instead of at his opponent, the troop would charge him and mob him out of the troop versus mob the opponent out of the troop. And if once you've been mobbed out, it's a very quick learning experience because it's not very nice.
And when you say he grabbed a black infant, it didn't work. He grabbed a brown infant. Brown infants are bigger babies, right? And
Yes,
so
that's right.
they don't typically
Yes.
translate
Yeah.
into this interaction, or
Well,
they do.
Well, they can, but you still had to have this pre-existing relationship with the infant in order to have the infant trust you and scream at your opponent if the opponent continued the aggression. And that's when the mobbing would happen. But if he didn't trust you, he screamed at you and you would get mobbed.
When you first arrived and you'd never been anywhere like the Rift Valley, right? And now your job is
Yeah.
to literally watch baboons and spend your life with baboons. But you went in like pretty like alone in this, right? You needed to figure a whole lot out, and the knowledge you had with you
Yeah.
was pretty wrong. Not just about the males, but all the things that at the time science wasn't really allowed to do. Talk about emotions, use the word friendships. And you were watching all this stuff happening, like trust. Will you talk about that part of it?
Yeah. I was trained as a ethologist, and so I had all of the same constraints and restrictions. I didn't call it friendship. I called it a special relationship because someone before had called it that. But they didn't know why. They knew that there were special relationships formed, but they didn't understand their importance and the social strategies. And it took me I hate to say this, it took me about 20 years before I got to the point where I felt that there was enough similarity between baboons and humans that in some important areas, I use the same words. But these days, the terminology is very loose, and I don't let students call things what I call them because they don't know, they don't have the knowledge about, they don't have the experiences of over and over and over again, and the knowledge of not slipping into some kind of anthropomorphic human term. So I don't give them the same privileges that I give myself, but I have fought very hard for that.
And you watched those relationships for years and years.
Oh yeah, I did.
And you definitely developed a relationship with watching them. Like you felt something for them.
Yeah.
But was that hard for, were you like resisting that for a while?
Oh yeah, yeah. Because when I started, a scientist couldn't have emotion. I mean, the animals didn't have emotions, and you certainly couldn't be objective if you had emotions about your animals. But by the time they became crop raiders, because the farming had come into the area, and then by the time I did the translocation, so that was 1981 was the crop raiding, and 1984 was the translocation, I realized that I could feel attached to them. And in fact, I did feel very attached. And that's why I studied the crop raiding. It was the first study, and it's now still the only study of naive baboons who become crop raiders. And the interesting thing is that one troop split apart into raiders and non-raiders. Another troop, who had the same opportunities, moved as far away as they could from the farming area. So that also taught me that baboons have agency, they exercise options, and mostly I felt like I could still do an objective study and feel very attached to the animals.
And it was okay to have both, be both.
And it was okay to have both,
right.
Yeah.
Right, which I would assume gave you a lot more freedom in just observing and being there without feeling so conflicted.
Yeah, 50 years is a long time. And watching the baboons that long has really changed my ideas, changed me. I'm a lot more humble now than I was when I was a youngster. And I'm a lot more unsure of how I stand on certain things. And yet on other things, I'm very certain that I have the knowledge. And it's really hard. So much has happened in these 50 years that it's hard to talk about it, not in sequence, which is one of the problems I had with trying to write the book was I didn't want to jump into the baboon social web and the amount of complexity that I know that's there now, because the reader would just be turned off. And then I realized that I could only do it by looking at how the complexity of what I was finding in the baboons unfolded over time, so that I tried many different approaches, but in the end, that was the approach that made the most sense and is the basis of the book.
Well, and some of the reveals to you in the early parts of the book, because you didn't really know, that much. And then there were a lot of things, that you didn't have control over, like the crop raiding and then the translocation. Those were big, big, like learning curves, I would imagine. Will you talk about the translocation and what all went down there? Because that was a pretty amazing feat you accomplished.
Yeah, it represented my attachment to the baboons and that I didn't want them to just die. They were being shot by a nearby army camp and also by the farmers, not being shot, but they were being hacked to death with the equivalent of machetes. And Now, in retrospect, I think I don't put myself in baboon shoes. Even though I've watched them for so long, I don't feel I can get inside their head. But I think I thought that I would rather take the risk and be free in a different place and possibly die as a result than to be left where I was and have a death sentence. And so that translocation was, and I had some very funny encounters with people because, as you say, baboons have a bad reputation. The analogy I use is it's like if I asked you, could I come into your house and bring some termites? Plus, I want to live in your house and watch what the termites do. And of course, you're going to say, no, absolutely not. And that was the task. And the other problem I had was that there had never been a scientific translocation of any primate species. And there were a lot of welfare releases and other things, but nobody did a follow up. I had to invent things. I just had to use my knowledge of baboons and invent how to capture them, how to translocate them, how to transport them, how to release them, how to make sure they didn't go onto a place, an adjacent ranch that I didn't have permission for them to be on. And I basically used my own understanding of baboons. I never had a plan B because if any of those things went wrong, I didn't know what to do. But fortunately, everything went right.
How many baboons was it that you moved?
I moved 132 and one got away, but males transfer between groups. And so I know he probably went and joined another troop. So I wasn't worried about him.
One of my favorite stories in the book is about after the translocation. And there one troop, and I can't think of their names, that starts with a C, I think. Yes.
Cripple.
When
Yeah.
half of them took off and the other half stayed.
Yeah.
Will you tell that story? It's so good.
Yeah. That was so endearing, and it still makes me cry when I think about it. So I was releasing the troops in the order in which of their importance. So the first one was Cripple Troop because they were getting into trouble as well. And so half of the group disappeared and the other half kept looking for them. And I thought, oh my God, this is not going to end well if we don't find them. And then suddenly they appeared. They had been searching. I don't know how they searched because I was with the remaining group. And they gave a reunion set of vocalizations that I've never heard before, and I've never heard since. And they put their arms over each other, and they were really embracing each other, again, using the nonverbal communication that they know how to use, and they would use in other contexts, but I'd never seen them all put together like that.
You say over the 50 years, like you never stopped learning really about the social complexities and the individual complexities.
Right.
But I guess there were big, huge swaths of complexity that you learned in the beginning, not knowing at all. But so what kind of stuff got revealed to you later that was more nuanced, but equally surprising?
During this time, we have the human age, the Anthropocene, which is the last, that people are fighting over when. But one of the things that's so interesting to me is that this human age has speeded up the rate of change, which means that I actually watched the baboons change their behavior in ways that allowed me to not have to speculate over, that, tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago, this might have happened. And it shifted my focus from looking at the outcome, that is, so-and-so has won so many encounters with another male that he's the dominant one. It shifted that to looking at the process. And it's the process that's been so fascinating to me. I've seen more than 12 fusions and fissions in just 20 years, which is more than all of the things, all of the fusions and fissions that you have in the literature of baboons for forever. And that actually allowed me to think about what it means to have a troop. And we often assume, or most scientists assume, that the group is a permanent structure and that individuals enter it. And it seemed to me that because the baboons were negotiating everything, that they were actually negotiating whether they were staying or leaving. And I had enough cases in this human speeded up rate of change that I could figure out a model of what a baboon group is about. The pressures that push out and cause separations are competition between individuals, social conflict. The pressures that push in are things like predator protection, being able to find foods, things like that. And what I was privileged to watch was to see how those things changed and made it possible for baboons to, this one study group, there was a little subgroup that left. And when they divide, they don't divide into half and half. And this one was just, I think it was only 7 animals. And I thought, oh, that's too small. It's not going to be a viable group. And it became a viable group because they figured out how to solve the problems of predation at night. So they slept near other troops and could enroll their eyes and ears. And then in the daytime, they said, bye-bye, I'm leaving all the social complexity and I'm going to forage in a smaller group. And then I'm going to protect myself against predators at night because that's when I'm most vulnerable. I was able to watch as an exotic cactus plant invaded. And it's not that there hasn't been research on Opuntia stricta. The prickly pear cactus, which we have from, well, this one comes from the rocky coast of Georgia. It's got a pad. It's a succulent, and it's very big, and it's got a pad. And this one has yellow thorns, and then it has fruits at the end that are about the size of my fist, and so many fruits. And on the fruits are these little glaucids, these little hairs. So the baboons figured out how to harvest them, how to roll them in the grass or in the dirt to get the little hairs off, how to eat them. And people took baboons as a model and figured out that they could eat them that way as well. So that was an incredible opportunity. I've been studying 2 different groups. Well, actually, this one group until 2018 had so many fissions that it ended up being 5 groups. But they were in on the ground floor in terms of before the cactus started spreading, whereas the other group, they ended up doing something which I think was a mistake. But that changed my ideas about how evolution worked as well. They went out of their home range, being led by another little group that had lost all of its males because of predators. So it's very unusual. There was this large negotiation and constant negotiation between the females in this one group and the females and males in this other group. And eventually that led to the 2 of them fusing. And they ended up invading the home range of another group. And sustained so much mobbing that we had females dying of stress-related diseases. Their infants were dying. There were male baboons who were dying because of injuries because they were defending their female friends. So, I told you that mobbing, it says you're doing something wrong, get out of here. And that usually works. But they were being mobbed daily for a couple years. And it just baffled me until they left the area. But that was 8 years later. To me, it just didn't make sense. And the fact that 8 years later, they moved back into their home range and stopped having this mobbing and stopped having this stress. But I don't think that baboons can figure things out over 8 years. I don't think we are very good at figuring things out over 8 years. So it just seemed to me that if baboons can make mistakes and then still survive, that doesn't fit how we think about evolution. We have evolution thought about very mechanistically, the whole Descartes thing of animals are perfectly adapted and, whatever. And so it made me rethink what it is that evolution is able to do. And I now think that there's a larger adaptive space and that animals who are smart and sophisticated like baboons can actually not do the right thing. And they just lucked out because they had fused and they were a pretty big size. They could lose these animals, the ones that died, the females and the males and some of the infants. It changed my whole idea about how evolution works. And I think the baboons have done that a lot for me over the years.
Yeah. You say in the book, too, when talking about evolution, how much social structures are a part of it, which for a long time, no one thought about social structures being a part of evolution.
Or even the possibility of it being culture. So I think this whole idea of cumulative culture is a way to make humans exceptional. But it's clear to me that humans are exceptional, and seeing it through baboon glasses, I can understand in a different way why they're exceptional. But many of the things that we think are uniquely human are actually present in other animals. And I think I was lucky not to study chimpanzees or bonobos because it's so easy to slide into human interpretations of their behavior because it looks so similar to ours. But the baboons made me work very hard in order to understand what it was that was going on. And so it was a way of controlling the ease with which I could slip into using human terms to interpret these behaviors.
Sure. From the very early days, with the translocation and before the translocation with the crop raiding, coexistence became part of your world in a big way, and was part of everyone else's world there for a long time. But what since in the 50 years from when you first kind of encountered the idea of coexistence through your career, what do you think about it now?
Well, I'm really lucky to be married to David Western, who created the first community-based conservation. And he also has talked about coexistence in a way that made a lot of sense to me. It's translated things that could be seen as win-lose to a win-win. But the trouble is that the animals have been not compromising for so long. We wealthy humans have to make, to put up or shut up. We need to decide what we're willing to change. Coexistence really wasn't the way I thought about it 50 years ago. And in that 50 years, a couple things have happened. One is that the population has skyrocketed, especially, I'm just talking about Kenya. I mean, when I first started, there were like 5 million people. Now they're close to 50 million people. So a 10-time expansion. Yeah. I started out on a ranch that had more wildlife than cattle. I was really insulated from the kinds of things that we know happen. And I think the baboons were the harbingers of the changes. So the land got sold to an agricultural cooperative, and that was because traditionally land is divided up, and it's been divided so many times that people just wanted another place that they could buy and own. The translocation was a conflict between the farmers and the baboons as wildlife. And that made me think about who has the right. If I look at it in terms of evolutionary time, baboons were there way before humans were. And then it was the Okiek, who are the traditional hunter-gatherers, and they're now restricted to a small area in the Mao Escarpment. Then it was the Maasai, about 500 years ago, who came through and did all sorts of horrible things, horrible by our sensibilities today, but not horrible by their sensibilities back then. And then it was the Coles who owned the ranch, and it just goes on and on. And it made me start thinking about who actually has the right, and once to the land or to anything. And once you situate things in context, you begin to see how the history has progressed and whether it's never as simple as people like to make out. So to begin with, I was very against the farmers. I thought I was on the side of the baboons, and the farmers were killing the baboons, and I hated them. And then I was walking from farm to farm, and I had a wonderful experience with a farmer family who had just lost most of their crops to the baboons. He had one maize cob left, and he made me some tea and offered me that maize cob. And it changed my attitude. And that's about the time that I met my husband, who developed community-based conservation, whose philosophy is if people are part of the problem, then people have to be part of the solution. And that is so much truer now than it's ever been before. So in terms of coexistence, I really think that we have trashed the planet to such an extent, and unfortunately, the politicians throughout the world care more about themselves than about what's happening either to their people or to the planet. I think everybody has to decide for themselves what they're going to do and what they're willing to give up. We have 70 acres here in Kenya, which is open to wildlife, and we have 2 acres in California. My husband's done the carbon footprint for that, but I still feel that I should not be flying except where it's absolutely necessary. So I've had one foot in California and one foot in Kenya for 50 years, but I'm not going to conferences and I'm not doing other things that I would have gone to because I don't think I have the right to make those decisions and travel that far. Now we know about micro and nano plastic particles. So I'm trying really hard to not use plastics. And I mean, you know, when I first came to Kenya in 1972, there was no garbage. The few things that were tinned, you know, in cans, people would take from the trash pit to use as a cup. And so the whole plastic thing has happened in my lifetime and in my career time. And it's just impossible now to avoid plastics. And so I'm trying to figure out how to recycle as much as I can. We're off grid totally in Kenya, which is one of the reasons maybe you're having a bad connection. So anyway, coexistence is really a lot harder now because of population size, because of what we've done to the environment. I mean, you name it, we just have built a ridiculously destructive way of living. And the sad part is that everybody wants to live that way. So it's really now for the wealthy people of the world to decide what it is that they are willing to give up. And hopefully they'll also vote with that in mind. So we'll see.
I thought one really beautiful thing that you said in the book was, yes, indeed, we have caused all of this destruction and damage to the planet and for other species. But we are also the only species that is wanting to help other species. And I've never heard anyone say that before, but I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, and that I took from my husband, who's been saying that now for a while. It's true. I mean, baboons don't care about other species. Elephants don't care about other species. We are the only species who violate that rule of competition. That gives me hope that there is a possibility for coexistence. Maybe not in my lifetime. I'm betting on it rather than getting too depressed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Strum. This was really a gift, and everyone should read your book because it's fascinating. It's called Echoes of Our Origins. I was so blown away from the minute I started reading it. And also it just really made me realize how little I knew about baboons.
And how much baboons have such a bad reputation.
I knew that. That's all I knew.
Yeah, that's right. And it's always the animals who suffer, and it's always a problem with the people.
Well, thank you very, very much. It's great to meet you.
Thank you very much.
To learn more about Dr. Strum and to order a copy of her new book, go to our website, speciesunite.com. We will have links to everything. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Species Unite. If you have a spare moment and could do us a favor, please subscribe, rate, review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps people find the show. I would like to thank everyone at Species Unite, including Gary Knudsen, Caitlin Pierce, Amy Jones, Paul Healy, Santina Polkilink, Bethany Jones, Hannah Gabrielson, and Anna Kolner, who wrote and performed today's music. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day.